Welcome to INN's CEO Talks. In this episode, we're talking about copper, Mongolian copper. My guest today is Ali Haji, who is the president of Aranjin Resources, and he's also the president and CEO of Ion Energy, which is a lithium brine exporter from Mongolia. Mr. Haji is also a member of the family of companies that owns Steppe Gold, Mongolia's premier gold producer. Ali, welcome. You are really invested in Mongolia. And what is it about Mongolia and copper in Mongolia right now that makes it such an important discovery and precious commodity?
Well, to start, Mongolia for us as a group has been a region in which we've been operating for the last 13 years. My chairman, Matthew Wood, had a pretty successful exit back in 2010 in the coal space. Mm-hmm. And then, as you mentioned, we did set up a gold producer by the name of Steppe Gold. Copper in Mongolia, the history there goes fairly far back. If you look at what Ivanhoe was able to accomplish and ultimately build what we call today the Oyu Tolgoi copper mine, which is the third largest copper and gold producer anywhere in the world, resides in Mongolia. So there's always been an inkling of, or an understanding that there is copper in Mongolia, and Oyu Tolgoi has proven that. What we're looking to do is look at the expanded sort of region and determine if there could be another Oyu Tolgoi in the region.
Yeah, okay. And you are in that region, aren't you?
Indeed. Yeah. So one of our assets is fairly close to Oyu Tolgoi, that's Baruun Tal. Bayan Undur is another project that we hold, and then we have Sharga, which is our flagship license. Looking at the consumption rates of copper today, Mongolia is of importance because China is consuming, again, the vast majority of copper on the planet. And having that proximity to the Chinese market, being in Mongolia, obviously makes Mongolia quite compelling when discussing copper.
It's not just China, though. You've got South Korea, you've got Japan, you've got big markets there as well that are seeing an increase in demand for copper, are they not?
They are indeed. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of years as a result of the pandemic is massive government spending to incentivize the electrification of the world. Electrification obviously requires copper for wiring and battery production, but it also requires lithium. And so having seen about $1 trillion being printed around the world by governments for the incentivization of this clean green energy revolution, the prices of copper have responded in a manner that they should, which is demand and supply. We're seeing that there is a shortage and the prices are continuing to uptick.
So where are you at in your ability to identify what the scale of the resource is at the moment?
So Sharga is our flagship project. It's currently an exploration project. We've drilled 2 holes, 222 meters. One of the more sort of pertinent intercepts, if you will, was a 13.5 meter intercept with over 1% copper and about 1 gram per ton gold. So pretty significant in that sort of wheelhouse of copper gold VMS type deposits. Our other asset, Baruun Tal, has had about 57,000 meters drilled on it. So over $10 million spent on it. And it has significant results that show copper up to 7-8% alongside silver. So there is a potential for precious metals on both these assets. And Bayan Undur is one that is currently in the exploration phase where we'll plan to drill in the coming months.
So what are your next steps on all 3 of those projects? I mean, you just talked about the fact that you're going to expand drilling on one project, but on the other 2, next steps, where do you go from here?
Next steps are we continue to drill, we continue to de-risk and get a better understanding of these assets. You then start to move towards building a resource estimate. That resource estimate can be used to entice strategics to come in and play a part with us as we continue to grow. Looking at the infrastructure in the region, Oyu Tolgoi being one of the largest producers in the world, they've built an infrastructure that allows them to ship concentrate over to the Chinese to China, mm-hmm. and they ultimately turn that into copper. So looking at sort of the region, the infrastructure and the relationships as well as the demand, the goal for the company would be in, say 2 years' time to be able to ship concentrate over to the Chinese as well.
And with that infrastructure in place, that makes it, of course, much easier to do. Do you plan on building out on your own, or are you looking at vending in with a major?
I think, looking at us as a group, we've had some early exploration and ultimate resource exits where we've shown early resource indication and exited. Hunu Coal to Banpu of Thailand was the first one in 2010. We've done similar things in Brazil where we sold Avanco Resources to Oz Minerals in March 2018. We've shown that we can bring a mine to production. So Step Gold went to production at the height of the pandemic. With Ion Energy, which is a sister yet independent company, we are in the midst of exploration with a goal not to go to production on our own. We would bring in a strategic. With Aranjin, I think the situation is a little more fluid because the processing around copper is very similar to that of gold, especially when you have precious metals involved in your ore body. And so we've shown that we can do it. But ultimately, I think it's too early to tell whether or not we would bring in a strategic to help us along the path, or whether it would purely be an offtake type agreement that we would ultimately bring to production.
So people who are paying attention to you will also be aware of the fact that you've just done a joint venture. Tell us about that and why it was necessary to do so.
The joint venture had a number of reasons as to why it came to fruition. One is the fact that Aranjin has been trading very much like a private company with 3 assets under its belt, market cap sub $10 million, with over $15 million spent across 3 assets. You can see that there's a massive valuation gap there. The results of the exploration program that were announced in December fell on deaf ears, so to speak. There was nobody representing the company, and as a result, it made sense to build a JV and put me as the head of Aranjin as well as Ion. So now we have a face for both these commodities. We know that lithium and copper are both very strong assets in the battery metal space, and so what better way to synergize, if you will, operations across these 2 assets, or these 2 asset classes. The other reason for the joint venture has to do a lot with what we found on Bavayul, which is Ion Energy's flagship license. So it's an 81,000 hectare license for our listeners in Vancouver, about 5 to 6 times the size of Vancouver. So a massive license in which we had to spend a fair bit of money and time de-risking. So we did some shallow holes across essentially the entire license space. And we found very high-grade lithium, which was a fantastic win for Ion Energy. But beyond that, we also saw extremely good anomalies for the copper and nickel side of the house. And so that prompted us to say, why not bring both these companies under one leadership individual, as well as due to the fact that there is some cross-pollination from the board, why not bring them together and use a reciprocal mining rights agreement to monetize what battery metals we would find, or what base metals we would find on Ion's licenses, and what lithium we would find on Aranjin's licenses. So the JV includes an 80-20 reciprocal mining right agreement. What that means is 80% of copper and nickel and other base metals found on Ion's licenses, that revenue would go to Aranjin. 20% would remain with Ion. And on the flip side, if we were to find lithium on Aranjin's licenses, we would keep 80% of the proceeds and Aranjin would keep 20%.
And when we take a look at that lithium market that is pretty much the same as the one for copper, the location in Mongolia makes it quite an ideal resource.
Absolutely. China is importing the vast majority of their lithium from Australia as well as LATAM. There is some local production, but it's not of the caliber that you would expect to see in a Tesla or an electric vehicle. And so if we're able to upend that supply chain from a lithium perspective, we would be significant players in the Chinese market. And on the other side of the house, if you look at the copper, as I said, Oyu Tolgoi has built that infrastructure. And the Sharga project, which is in Gobi Altai, very close to the Altai crossing into China as well. So the infrastructure is there for copper. We just need to come or show the market that we have a significant asset. And I think the intercepts that we've already presented are quite significant and will show promise.
So for viewers right now who are going, I don't know a lot about Mongolia, what's the number one thing that you want them to come away with from having watched this interview?
I think Mongolia is a country that it's one of the youngest democracies in the world, being an ex-Soviet satellite. It is a democracy in the truest sense. We've seen the government change from the People's Party to the Democratic Party and vice versa on a number of occasions since they've had independence. We've also spoken with members of government from different political parties, and each of them are sort of singing the same song, if you will, which is Mongolia is open for business, and we're seeing that more and more now with the fact that Rio Tinto, for instance, just forgave the Mongolian government of their $2.4 billion debt that was associated to Oyu Tolgoi. And so we're seeing more and more companies pay attention to Mongolia. Mongolia is sandwiched between Russia and China. It's about 1.5 times the size of Ontario, with a population of 3.5 million people. Okay. So it is one of the most sparsely populated countries on the planet, and as a result, only 3% of it has been explored. Right. There's significant potential there for investors and the local government to monetize what it is being said to be over $1 trillion in mineral resources. So it is a very significant sort of country. It's one that has mining as a major part of their GDP, and so as a result, you have enough skilled labor in country, and you're not bringing in, expensive expats, if you will. Mm-hmm. So you can keep your costs quite low. Your market to acquire anything that you produce is literally on your doorstep, and government support has been fantastic thus far. So Mongolia, in our view, is a fantastic mining jurisdiction. So with all of your activities underway right now, what's your schedule on which you're going to be able to come back to us and report further developments? For Aranjin, we're going to start to do additional work on Bava Oil's licenses, so the Ion Energy licenses. We'll have some drilling starting there, I believe, next week. The teams have mobilized. We'll also be doing additional RC drilling on Sharga as well as Baruun Tal. So you can expect to have me back in about 3 months' time, if you will, and we can discuss the exploration results as well as how we're trending towards that resource estimate. Well, I'm quite fascinated by what you're doing in Mongolia. I've seen the development of that over the last decade, especially as you point out Oyu Tolgoi. It was a remarkable discovery. So I know that there will be other viewers who are going to say, yes, I want to stay on top of what you're doing at Aranjin. Great. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here, Stuart. Yeah, thanks for your time today.